All right, we're going to do a video on a classic Adirondack pattern here. One of the flies that I fish quite a bit up in this area. This is going to be the sable wulff. That's kind of what we're going to have at the end of the process here. Really bushy, dry fly. Honestly, there's not really any kind of crazy technique or anything we're going to be using here. It's really just the materials and how those materials kind of work together with what the purpose of the fly is. This is a Fran Bedder's pattern, kind of modified from something that Lee Wulff came up with, I believe, back in the 30s. That Wulff series of flies designed by him. Fran took it, kind of made some tweaks to it, and adjusted it to the Adirondacks, and kind of came up with one of the best flies we have for our area. So in the vise, I've got a Firehole 718 in a size 14, and I got my classic Fran Bedder's orange thread here. So we're going to get that started right behind the eye. And I'm going to run a thread base pretty much all the way down the shank. And I'm just going to pull down on that tag end, applying a little bit of pressure that'll help keep them thread wraps nice and tight. And part of the reason why I do this, I don't do a thread base on all of my flies, but I do one on this because this is going to use some pretty bushy materials that create a lot of bulk, and anytime you're tying those in onto a bare shank, you run the risk of them just kind of wanting to spin around the shank. So we're going to try to avoid that. So we're going to leave a little gap here between the hook eye and where we're going to stop our thread, and that's where we're going to tie in our first material, which is our wing, and that's going to be from a calf tail. Now, with a calf tail, you've got this stuff here down at the butt, and you can kind of see how, I wouldn't say they're short fibers, but they're shorter. If I come all the way up here to the top, you get much longer fibers. This is where you're going to want to take that from. These short, dense fibers down here, they're very good for wings, don't get me wrong, but you got a lot of underfur in there, and it creates a level of bulk that sometimes makes the fly a little hard to work with. So if you take these longer fibers up top, you can clear out the underfur and make it a little bit easier to work with. So I'm going to get those fibers stacked up here. Another thing too is calf tail is a really, really bushy material. So when you stack this up, if you don't get nice, clean, even fibers like you do with some other, like deer hair, don't worry about it. That's kind of the point of the fly. Is bushiness, stuff kind of all over the place. You're going to get fibers a little bit straighter than when you cut them off of the actual tail, but they're not going to be dead on. But that doesn't matter. You're going to get some kind of bushy mess like this, but that's actually kind of what we're looking for. So I'm just going to keep transferring my grip until I get the length that I want, which is right about there. And I'm going to use a pinch wrap to get that first wrap down. And I'm going to start making really tight wraps, moving my way back. Once I get about the distance that I'm going to need for my hackle, I'm going to move my thread forward a couple of wraps and slip my scissors in here horizontally and then bend them down at a little bit of an angle so that I can snip all this material off at a taper. You might have to go in and clean it up a little bit. Like I said, there's a lot of material here you're working with. I'm going to come in, I'm going to shave off a little bit from the top here, just to kind of keep some of that from getting out of control. All right, so remember, we moved our thread forward a little bit, so I'm going to go 1, 2, 3 in the opposite direction to return it to its starting place. I'm going to gather all these fibers, put my finger on the back side of the hook to keep everything from rolling, and I'm going to take tight, touching wraps towards the back of the fly. And as you do that, you should see the taper that you created start to develop. And that's looking about as good as we can hope for. All right, next order of business is we're going to take a patch of this woodchuck. And what we want is we want these guard hairs up here. So we're going to grab a few by the tips. We're going to snip those off. And we're just going to slip out a bunch of that underfur right there. This is good dubbing. If you want to put that aside and hang on to it, that's really good stuff. I'm not going to do that now, but get that in your stacker. I've used a lot of that woodchuck under fur and a dubbing loop for a lot of different types of flies. It's good stuff. I have a separate bag marked for it, and I just kind of keep it in there. Woodchuck will stack a lot better than the calf tail, so when they pull that out, we're just going to gather all those fibers and just keep switching our grip to get everything gathered in one place. Then we're going to lay it down on the hook shank, kind of get an idea of what we want for length of our tail, and that seems like that's going to be good right about there. And I'm just going to get that going with a couple of tight wraps. Get some of this kind of stray material that's kind of sticking out all over the place, get that out of the way, and we'll hold that tight and tie that all the way down. And again, the tail's another material you're going to want a little bit bushy. The whole point of this fly is bushiness and extra material, a little bit more material than you traditionally put on a dry fly, because you really want it to be able to handle that rough, turbulent water we see up here in the Adirondacks. And we're going to work our way with touching wraps back up towards the front, continuing to gather all of those woodchuck fibers and maintaining that uniform body we created. Oops. And doubled back over my own thread for a couple wraps. Once you get back to the point where you've got about the room that you're going to want for your hackle, let's take everything, stroke it straight up. You can see a gap there between the two materials. Slip your scissors right in there and snip that off. And we'll run our thread over the excess. Okay, keeping everything smooth and clean. Let's see here. Once we get some materials in here, we want to make sure we're maintaining that focus. Now I'm going to move my thread up a little bit. Let's get these wings stood up. So I'm going to pull everything back and just do a couple of wraps in front. You don't need a ton of wraps. In fact, you specifically don't want a ton of wraps. And the reason why is the bigger of a thread dam you create in front of your wing, the bigger of a lump you have that's going to send your hackle flying in all kinds of different directions. And you don't want that. So I'm going to get rid of some of this stuff in my way on the bottom. So this is going to be tough to film because you got to look at it straight dead down that way. I'm going to take my calf tail and I'm going to split it up for what I believe to be about half and half. I'm just going to eyeball it. And I'm going to run my thread right dead through the middle, and that looks about evenly split. Now I will say I probably should have used a little bit more calf tail, but I'm not going to start everything all over. I want that wing to be a little bit bushier than it is, but it'll be just fine like that. So once you get that split in half, I'm just going to hold it tight, and I'm going to run some thread wraps around the base of that calf tail just to kind of gather those materials and help them stand up. Then I'm going to do the same thing to the wing closest to me. Whoops. And once you get about the amount of pressure that will keep your thread going, you don't want to just kind of put some wraps in there until everything is secure, because your thread can pop off there when you're securing the wings. Alright, so now this is where you can stand your wings up the way you want. I'm going to put my thread in front of it, and I'm going to use my thread to kind of pull it back where I want it, and then do a couple wraps and just lock in your work. You know, on second thought, I would have liked a little bit more room in front of the wings too, so yeah, proportions aren't where I'd love them to be, but we're in good shape. Alright, next order of business is our dubbing. This is what I'm using here. This is the Australian possum dyed in that rust color that Fran used so much. This is not an original bag of his dubbing. It's something that I bought from, sadly, I don't even remember where. I wish I did, because I'm running low on it. But it's dyed the same color, it's the same stuff, but it's not a bag of his actual authentic stuff, which I really, really want. And I know a lot of people out there have a bag that was dyed by him, and it's got his name right on it, and I want that, but you're going to have a real hard time finding somebody willing to part with that. So, not holding my breath on that one. Maybe somebody's listening to this and feeling charitable and wants to give it a good home. You know how to get a hold of me. So I'm going to bring my thread right back to the base of the tail. Get one wrap with the dubbing, and then once that dubbing is starting to be applied, we're just going to work our way up the body. You're not really going to have to do a ton of work with the body to build that taper because we already took care of that with the underbody. But if there's any gaps or any place that you got to kind of fix or fill in, just go ahead and do that. I got to kind of do 2 dubbing loops here. I can't make a loop long enough with all my camera stuff set up. So we'll redub, we'll keep plugging. And that's about good. I'd like a little bit more to square off the end of my wraps there. Build that up a little bit. And the final wrap, and then we're going to take our bare thread, weigh that down a little bit, and we're pretty much good. Get some of that stray stuff out of there. Alright, hackle-wise, we're going to do the classic grizzly and brown combo. So the grizzly is what I'm going to wrap second. So if I'm going to wrap it second, I'm going to tie it in first. So I'm going to get my grizzly in there with a couple of wraps. My brown is what I'm going to wrap first, so I'm going to tie that in second. So whatever hackle you're going to wrap second, you want to tie in first. And we're going to go and get that secured. I'm going to leave the stems just to help build up a little bit of bulk here in front, because you can see the difference in the platform that I'm tying my hackle onto. We'll snip that off. Alright, I'm going to use a tool that I like, but don't really use all that much. This twisting, flexible hackle plier here. Sometimes I find it in my drawer and I go, oh yeah, I forgot I had that. I kind of like it. So I'm going to take one wrap with the brown to get the feather kind of down facing me. Clamp that into my plier. And then we're just going to start, whoops. I don't have a lot of room here with my camera, so it's making one of the simplest aspects of this a little bit tougher. It's the downsides of filming when you're tying. It's a lot easier when you don't have all this stuff in front of you and you're just tying for fun. Alright, so get that latched in. And we're just going to start taking some touching wraps. And these pliers are cool because they're going to twist as I go. Keep that hackle in the same position that I want it. And remember what I said in the beginning, you don't have to be as, neat and coordinated as with a other type of dry fly. This is supposed to be a really bushy pattern. Once we get that towards the eye, we'll get that tied off. A couple wraps just to hold it in place. And we'll switch our operation over here to the grizzly. This is always my favorite part. I love doing brown and grizzly because once you start wrapping the grizzly, you see the color that you're shooting for starting to kind of take place. Man, my pliers keep slipping. All right, there we go. Oof. All right. We're just going to end this experiment here. There. These English ones grip a lot better. So just run that through with a few wraps behind. A couple of wraps in front. Secure. There we go. Alright, glad everything held. So we'll get a couple wraps just to secure it. Let's fold these back. Get a couple of wraps in front just to aim them towards the back. Get those out of there. Get some of the excess out of there. A couple of fibers around here that aren't really cooperating. A little piece of calf tail right there. All right. Come build that head up a little bit. Finish that with a whip finish. Now this is 8/0 thread, so I can't really yank my knot too tight. So once that knot is cinched down, I don't do this all the time, but I'll come in here with a little bit of resin, and this is nice too because that'll kind of gloss up the head a little bit. That orange is a really, really cool color, so accenting that is not the worst thing. Give that a little zap. And that is it. That is the Ausable wulff. Little variation of a wolf pattern from back in the 30s by Fran Betters. That'll float like crazy in that pocket water in the Adirondacks. Real bushy fly. Tied pretty much the same way as a traditional dry. But definitely one of the classics up here in my neck of the woods. So, any questions, comments, anything, just throw them in the comments and I'll respond as soon as I can.